Welcome to our study in the book of Revelation. In this lesson, we will introduce this magnificent, complex book by exploring why and when it was written. While some consider Revelation to be one of the most important books in the Bible, almost everyone agrees that it is one of the most difficult books to understand. A good place to start is with its purpose, which can help us understand what it can teach us. We can break its purpose down into three categories. First, it is a letter written to encourage the church. Second, it is a prophecy, telling us something about what the future will look like. And third, it is apocalyptic literature, meaning it uses a lot of symbols and strange imagery to talk about that future. So let's begin by looking at Revelation as a letter written to encourage the church. Around the year AD 95, John, a disciple of Jesus, writes Revelation and sends it to 7 churches in Asia Minor, or present-day Turkey. As we read it, we must first ask what this letter means to its original recipients. Revelation is written to address issues that the 7 churches were facing. We should always keep this in mind as we try to figure out what it all means. Second, we must look at Revelation as prophetic literature. We don't have to guess that this is the case. We actually see it mentioned 5 times in the book, including in Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. Here it says, "Blessed is the one who reads, and those who hear the words of the prophecy, and keep the things which are written in it, for the time is near." Because this letter includes prophecy, we need to look at what qualifies something as prophetic literature and the tools we can use to interpret Revelation in light of its prophetic theme. Keep in mind that anytime you study a book of prophecy, the message is intended primarily to be applied to our lives today. When the prophets tell us about the future, it is so we can live the right way now according to what the future will be. We might say it this way: in light of what God has revealed about himself in the past and in stories about the future, what kind of person should you be right now in the present? That is the core of any prophetic message. Now, we know that John is speaking about the future facing these saints. He says in Revelation chapter 1 verse 1 that the book addresses the things which must soon take place, and he insists that the time is near. The question of how near will of course leave plenty of room for discussion and study. The third way we have to see this book is to view it as apocalyptic literature. This type of literature is strange for many readers today, but it was quite familiar to those who first received the letter. The word apocalyptic is drawn from the Greek language and means uncovering something which is hidden. It can also mean to pull back the veil. In biblical terms, this pulling of the veil has to be done by God and no one else. When God pulls back the veil, he is the one who lets us see and understand things that used to be secret. This is also the meaning of the word revelation. We cannot experience revelation because of anything we do, but only through God making something known to us. Apocalyptic literature was popular in the couple centuries surrounding the early church. We only have a few books that use this style in the Bible, mainly Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation. Apocalyptic literature preaches its message through the use of creative symbols, which are somewhat mysterious to us today, but were likely familiar to the original audience. Revelation chapter 1 verse 1 says that God communicated this revelation by his angel to his bondservant John. The word communicated in Greek here is not simply the word for say or speak, but means signified or given in signs. So, we are told from the very first verse that Revelation is a book of signs and symbols that represent something else. These signs and symbols should be interpreted carefully in order to reach its message. Revelation tells the people of God to remain faithful and to endure persecution brought by God's enemies. It tells the story of Satan being defeated and his kingdom being overthrown. Jesus is still working in the world through his saints, and he will return soon to bring about God's kingdom and to fulfill past prophecies. Despite ongoing differences of interpretation over many of this book's verses, the core message of Revelation is clear. We must stay rooted in our faith, no matter what happens in the world around us. Our God will be victorious, and we will all have to answer for how we have lived our lives on Judgment Day. The injustices that we see every day will be made right when Jesus returns, and we will all enter into eternity, either to be condemned or to be in the presence of God forever. God inspires this book to be written using apocalyptic coded images in order to hide the treasures of the kingdom from the unfaithful while revealing them to the faithful. Jesus uses the same technique in many of his kingdom parables. The Gospel of Mark shows Jesus switching abruptly from preaching to parables, confusing even his disciples. Jesus' disciples then asked him questions like, "Why do you speak in parables? Why not just say things in a simple way?" Jesus' response is that he won't explain the parables to the crowds, but only to his disciples. Why would Jesus be so selective about who he explains this message to? This is because the disciples actually draw near to him to learn, unlike the crowds. The crowds just want to see miraculous healing and are very shallow in their desire to learn. Jesus says 3 times in Revelation 2, "Let the one who has ears hear what the Spirit says to the churches," a phrase he often says after teaching parables as well. Now we can see that all 3 of Revelation's elements, encouragement, prophecy, and apocalyptic literature, should be kept in mind as we study the book of Revelation. If we treat Revelation, as some do, as only a book describing the spiritual battle of good versus evil, then we will miss out on some very important lessons from the letter. Now, as we continue, let's focus on the language of symbols found throughout this book. According to one scholar, the book of Revelation should be interpreted in a way that is opposite to how we interpret normal narrative literature. In normal narrative writing, everything is supposed to be taken literally unless it is obvious that it is symbolic. In apocalyptic literature, then, everything is to be taken symbolically unless it is obvious that it is literal. Here we find the center of conflict over interpretation of this letter. Most disagreements over the meaning of Revelation come out of disagreements over what is literal and what is symbolic. Let's explore some of the important categories of symbols in Revelation. The first striking category is Revelation's use of numbers. The numbers 4, 7, 12, 1000, and its multiples appear often. The repetition of a number, especially if it's repeated 3 times, means that something very important is being described. The number 4 is used to show the 4 corners of the earth, east, west, north, south, as well as the 4 winds. This number is used to represent the entire earth. The number 7 is used to show the completeness of something. For example, Revelation 1:4 tells us about the 7 spirits who are before God's throne. Here it does not mean that there are 7 individual spirits, but that the fullness of the Holy Spirit is present. God also created everything in 7 days, which shows the completeness of creation. Next, 7 horns indicate absolute power. The 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls represent the fullness of God's judgment on his enemies. Opposite in meaning to the number 7, the number 6 signifies imperfection. According to some, 6 is used as the number of humanity because humanity was created on the 6th day. If number 7 represents God's perfection, the number 6 represents human imperfection. The most famous example of this is the number of the Antichrist, which is 3 6s. Number 12 is closely related to 12 tribes of Israel. The walls of New Jerusalem are 144 cubits wide and 12,000 stadia long. It has 12 gates and 12 foundations. Thus, the number 144,000 also is a symbolic number of all the redeemed people of the earth. Another category of symbols that we find involves names like Jezebel and Balaam. These names have an Old Testament background of false teaching, idolatry, and spiritual compromise, so they are used to describe those things. Names of cities are used too. The city of Jerusalem is always used to reference God's people and the bride of Christ, as we see in Revelation 21. Babylon symbolizes the enemies of God. The city Babylon is described as the great adulteress who seduces the people into worldliness and materialism in Revelation 17 and 18. These 2 cities are described as women, one simple, pure, and wearing white, symbolizing Jerusalem, and the other arrogant, bold, and wearing purple, symbolizing Babylon. Babylon is pictured as an adulteress. and Jerusalem is pictured as a bride. Jesus is described both as a slain lamb, bringing to mind his gentle spirit and his sacrifice for us, but also a lion, portraying him as a conquering king. Have you ever wondered how he can be represented by two animals that seem completely different? This is because Jesus came to earth as a lamb the first time and faced suffering for us. When he comes the second time, it will be as the victorious king who has conquered both sin and death. The beast coming out of the sea that we read about in chapter 13 is likely the Antichrist, because in Daniel chapter 7, all the beasts symbolize worldly empires that stand against God's people. The Antichrist may also represent multiple figures, as John writes in 1 John 2:18. As you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. The sea is often used as a symbol of evil and chaos throughout Scripture. That's why the beasts are coming out of the sea. In Revelation chapter 21, the sea is not included in the description of the new creation, which indicates that there will be no presence of evil in the new creation. John then begins to describe the new heavens and the new earth, but ends up describing the holy city instead. He says it is like a cube coming down from heaven to the earth. The cube structure resembles the most holy place of the tabernacle. We are also told that this holy city, this new Jerusalem, is the bride of Christ, which is the church. This symbolism tells us that God's people will be in the presence of God forever without anything getting in the way. According to Revelation 21, 2-4, God will be their light and the people will enjoy his presence for eternity. One more important category is the use of cosmic events to describe political events. Cosmic events like earthquakes, the darkening of the sun, a blood-red moon, and stars falling from heaven all describe great political events, such as the fall of a great nation. These categories do not cover every symbol in the letter, though. There are crowns that represent authority, horns that indicate power, lampstands that symbolize the church, and so much more. This book is, as we stated, beautifully complex. So, it is clear that apocalyptic literature is filled with symbolism, but that does not mean that there is no reality behind those symbols. These symbolic things point to real things, and in this letter, those real things are just being described in more abstract ways. Now that we have seen that Revelation should be viewed as a letter, as prophecy, and as a piece of apocalyptic literature, let us remember that it is a message of keeping faith even in the darkest hour. It is a message of hope in a God who not only has a plan, but has the wisdom and power to carry it out. It tells us that we should be faithful people doing kingdom work while we wait for Christ to return. Decide today, then, to be faithful to God and to His Word. Never forget that Jesus is coming back, bringing both judgment and reward with Him.